welcome all of you. It's really a huge pleasure for us to welcome you at our final event of the project PARTES. Don't worry, PARTES is not dying. It's just transforming into a PARTES.com. So we already have a follow-up project because there was so much good work done and so many networks and exchanges and new ideas. So, but still, now it's an opportunity to look back and see what we have achieved in the PARTES project. And the idea of this conference is, of course, also to put in context. So that's why you will see we have panels on the broader threat landscape, and also we're looking to see what other projects have produced that were also working in related areas to ours. So there's going to be lots of PARTES, but also lots of other super important and interesting things. But before we go into the details, I would like to introduce to you a very important person for our project and for ISF projects in general. And this is Tamara Munoz from the European Commission, who will say a few words on behalf of the European Commission. She is program manager in DG Home, and great that you came here to Vienna and joined us for this event. And floor is now yours.
Thank you, Daniela, for your kind words. For me, it's a pleasure as well to be here, because for those who don't know me, I've been working in the Commission already for 4 years now, and in the projects that we are dealing with these days, protection of public spaces and concretely places of worship, I've been working with you closely for the last 3 years. So I know many of you, and I'm always happy to join your events whenever possible. And PARTES in particular, I've seen it from its inception, and I'm happy to be here for the end of it, and also for the late kickoff, if I may call it that, of the continuation project, because I know you already started in March, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm very, very happy to be able to participate today. And just to explain a little bit for those who may not know, I come from E4 in DG Home, so the Directorate General for Migration and Home Affairs. And in DG Home, we have 3 funds. You might be familiar with ISF for sure, the Internal Security Fund. But we also have the AMIF fund and the BMVI. AMIF deals with migration issues, BMVI with the border management and visa policy. So under ISF, there is a big chunk of the funds that go to each member state, and they decide how to spend it according to their domestic needs. But there is a smaller part of this fund that goes to what we call union actions, which is this type of project that we are seeing today. PARTES is a union action project. And the particularity of these projects is that they deal with transnational problems, or rather problems that affect the union as a whole. And the nature, the nature of, or the key factor, the key element of these projects is this transnationality, this transnational dimension, and the fact that they involve diverse. The consortia is diverse in terms of nationality and also in terms of the background of the entity. So we gather civil society, law enforcement, academic institutions, and many more. We intend, with the goal of the call for proposals that we launch under these union action calls, is to bring together these different stakeholders from different member states. For example, PARTES has 15 partners from 10 different member states. This is a very ample coverage of EU member states. And the idea behind union actions is to, as I was saying, bring them together, cooperate, and develop new methodologies, testing new models, doing research, whatever is the priority at the moment of the Commission, to bring a new added value, to create something that is meaningful and useful for different member states, for different contexts, because it's very as I was just discussing before with some of you, it's very different, the reality in a Baltic state compared to the reality of a Mediterranean state. The concerns are different. The way law enforcement works in one member state is very different from another. So this is the beauty that I personally see in the union actions. So this is a little bit of a brief introduction of what we do in my unit, in the E4. And about PARTES, what I can say is that it's part of a bigger call, of a bigger galaxy of projects. Here today we have, if I don't see them, but yes, I see Martin from Prosperous, Cass from SOAR. There was members of PARTES who are also members of Shrines. So it's a really big community of projects that have been running since, I think it started in 2017 with the so-called Protect calls. So these calls are aimed at funding projects to develop strategies to protect public spaces in general. So here we have today a project dealing with places of worship, but we have a wide variety of all the projects that, for example, deal with the protection of touristic sites or large sport facilities or public transport security. So it's a very, very ample range of actions that we cover with these calls. And I invite you to check them out in the Funding and Tenders portal. This is where you can find all the information about the things that the European Commission funds and concretely about the projects under the Internal Security Fund. About PARTES, I've been lucky to join you in some of your national workshops. I was in Spain last year, for example, in Melilla. I've been as well in Brussels in another workshop you did just later in 2024, if I'm correct. I've had the opportunity to see you also in the June 2024 event that DG Home organized to bring together all the projects funded under all the calls in all policy areas of the DG. In June last year, yes. So there's many opportunities in which we can connect and in which we try to make you connect among all the projects of the same, working in the same area. And PARTES, as I was saying, has done plenty of things. The living labs, the national workshops, the dissemination and awareness raising campaigns. And I'm very happy that indeed there is a continuation project already running, PARTES.com. I'm looking forward to seeing everything that you have in stock. And well, congratulations so far on the great job done with PARTES, and I wish you all the best for PARTES.com. I'll be here the rest of the day, so if anyone has any questions about the ISEF funds, I'm ready to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamara. And that was actually very useful to navigate the maze of the EU, which is not always easy, especially for beginners. So thank you very much for that, and also for your kind words. I guess the stakes are high, so yeah, we make a promise that we will continue at least at the same level as so far. All right, I'm going to continue with my introduction to the project and the conference. Perhaps a few words on the agenda first. So after this, I will try to be on time, 11:30 as planned. After that, there's going to be the first panel looking at the topic of discerning hate, the threat landscape, and we're going to have wonderful contributions from several researchers, actually two from our project, but also who work on other issues to have a better understanding of what the threat landscape looks today. And also what kind of measures are being taken to address these. We're going to have a lunch break at 1 o'clock until 1:30. And then we're going to continue with the second panel on impact and countermeasures protecting the online and offline spheres. And then we also reserved a little bit of time for us to network and talk about future plans, current activities, and so forth. So at this point, I will continue with the introduction to the project. You have already heard some information on the activities that we have performed so far. I'm wondering if I can have my PowerPoint presentation at this point. It would be actually quite useful. You guys have heard PARTES the whole time. It's actually an acronym for a title which is called Participatory Approaches to Protecting Places of Worship. And the emphasis in our project has been very much on these participatory approaches. So there were other projects that were focused more on tools and as we say, hardcore security solutions on protecting infrastructure and also place of worship. But we were looking more into a broader security concept that also had a very important preventive aspect. And in this sense, we also focused on establishing cooperation, communication channels between religious communities and security agencies and authorities. And also we went, as it were, deep into mainstream society to increase their awareness about these issues. And this connects very well to contemporary concept of security that say that it is a task for the whole society and for the whole government. So it's not just something that, security agencies need to deal with or religious communities, but also the entire society and also other members of government. So this is what I'm going to tell you very briefly today. Overview, context, approach, objectives, results. There's also a video actually, so it's not going to be just text. We also have produced a number of videos which are on our YouTube channel. Very nice videos and very high quality, I might add. So I encourage you to consult them as well. These are the partner organizations, as Tamara mentioned, quite a broad coverage of Europe. And we made sure to also include police authorities, but also religious communities, and of course, research institutes. At this point, I would like the guys in the back to show us the video. It's an introductory video, the very first we made, that explains what the project is about.
The PARTES project integrates 14 European partners who seek to develop a prevention and change behavior model to protect places of worship in the face of acts of vandalism and attacks on the faithful.
Well, with PARTES we hope to achieve a general security approach which is thinking also more in the direction of prevention than just reaction.
The teamwork is based on strong guiding principles for each of the partners who, together, seek to guarantee effective results over time.
The project aims to guarantee the protection of spaces of worship, building a model of a better understanding of the genesis of violent extremism and the way it affects to the attacks of potential attacks to places of worship.
In summary, the focus of the project is centered on 6 fundamental objectives. Map the specific threat landscape of involved religious communities.
Lo que nosotros esperamos tener con este proyecto es un enfoque basado en la participación de actores religiosos, de autoridades públicas y de cuerpos y fuerzas de seguridad que nos permita proteger de una mejor manera tanto los lugares de culto, al igual que también conseguir involucrar a todos esos actores para que exista una mayor cooperación entre todos ellos.
Assess and derive lessons learned on vulnerabilities and existing security concepts of involved religious communities and exchange best practices on protective measures Europe-wide.
Como acciones a tener en cuenta, considero que es necesario el conocer de primera mano todos esos prejuicios que tenemos con estos grupos religiosos y abordar implicando no solo a todas las autoridades públicas, sino también a los grupos religiosos, cuerpos y fuerzas de seguridad, por supuesto, para abordar de forma unánime unas líneas de actuación para combatir este tipo de actos violentos.
Establish cooperation and communication structures and channels between religious communities and local authorities.
Well, overall, I think our main goal must be to prevent further attacks on places of worship. Obviously, this is not something that we can attain overall, but we hope that with our general and wider approach, we can achieve a reduction of this threat to religious sites overall.
Develop proactive and preventive security measures.
I think that we are all responsible of changing this attitude. We have to work with the communication, with the media. We have to work with the educators. We have to work with religious leaders, and especially with politicians, in order to make them see that hate rhetoric or radical rhetoric doesn't lead to anything good.
Carry out trainings and workshops with religious and local authorities.
We need to build stronger communication and collaboration with religious institutions and public actors. On the basis of that, we would have a stronger security mechanism that would be able to potentially prevent such terrorist attacks in the future.
Raise awareness among the wider population about the threat and strategies of extremist organizations targeting places of worship and involve them in prevention strategies.
Let's work together to guarantee freedom of religion.
Improving the security of places of worship for a better future.
Crear una narrativa alternativa con respecto a las comunidades religiosas y crear un clima de tolerancia con respecto a ellas.
Diversity is the spice of life.
La diversidad nos enriquece como personas. Seamos parte del cambio, dejando a un lado los prejuicios y apostando por la tolerancia, el respeto y la unión entre pueblos.
All right. Well, every time I see it, I get impressed somehow. I don't know. It's like, I can see. Anyway, so yeah. Also yesterday, some of you have been at our awareness raising event, and it was also under the sign of diversity, and it was really amazing to see the exchanges between various kinds of, generations and religions and cultures. So, yeah, I think it really is something that we should continue doing. Now, just to give you a brief overview of the project, as in, the context and the approach. So obviously, it was on the background of, rising trends of attacks and hate crimes against place of worship in Europe, with a very complex threat landscape. So, which is why it was important from the very beginning to really map it and not just rely on anecdotal evidence. We knew, but we of course saw in follow-up workshops that the protection of place of worship was not sufficient. And it was, as I said, important to go beyond the actual, hardcore security measures, which were necessary. Of course, everybody agrees, but also, and what some, most of the people also said, ideally we shouldn't have them. Yeah. So because places of worship are places where people should be able to go without security checks and borders. We did in the project, as it says here, a comprehensive prevention model for the protection of place of worship, which was evidence-based. It was really important to have an initial research component to understand what the threat looks like, ideological basis and so forth, but also what the vulnerabilities were, and then to also be inclusive, participatory, as I mentioned. It was important to involve religious communities, and we did that at every step of the project, but also the broader communities and also, of course, the security authorities. And yeah, as we did yesterday and all along the project, it was also central to educate the broader public on the implications of toxic rhetoric. This is the architecture of the project. I'm not going to go into much detail, just to see basically the logic of it, as I mentioned before. First, a threat landscape analysis, then development of security communication structures through participatory approaches, and then capacity building, training, awareness raising. The objectives were briefly shown in the video as well, so I'm not going to insist on this. Moving on to the results, this is a very a summarized version of the results. We're going to have a separate presentation on what the project has produced, in particular what we call the Guardian approach. But for here, just to see a little bit of a flavor, I guess, of it. First of all, the mapping, which led to reports on all 10 countries, but then also workshops. It was important to have not just European exchanges, which were, of course, all through the project, but also local workshops. We realized during the project that language makes a difference, it's important. So in order to really reach the target group, the stakeholders, it was important to organize these national workshops with the knowledge developed at the European level, but translated in the local language, and also taking stock of the experiences and the knowledge at the local level. We also had 5 interfaith dialogue forums, 2 living labs, and of course, as I mentioned before, there were several awareness-raising events. We also had an online campaign with long videos, short videos, so really trying various kinds of avenues to reach the main stakeholders, but also the broader public. I will also mention here the action sheets, which you all have received with the package, and these are very concrete. I guess in other terms we would call them best practices or promising practices, but things that can be also applied in other contexts and are really of a very practical nature. They will be mentioned also in the follow-up presentation in the second panel. All right, so. Oh, actually, there was another slide, sorry. Yeah. I already mentioned this, the Guardian approach, the professional videos, the awareness-raising events, and then, of course, the capacity building workshops, which also took place in 8 countries to really convey the knowledge that we have gathered to the people who need it, which are the religious communities. After that, there was also a European follow-up workshop to understand the transferability of results, but also to disseminate our knowledge and practices further. All right, and that's the slide I was actually waiting for. It's actually 11:30, very much on time. Hopefully we can keep up the good work. At this point, I would like to invite the panelists of the first panel on stage. We are going to start the first panel that looks at discerning hate, the threat landscape. Starting with the first on my list, Eric Haka from SOAR. Here he's going to talk about mainstreaming right-wing hate with online ecosystems. Please join us. Next, there's going to be José Luis Salido from Fundea, Euro-Arab Foundation for Higher Education. Very instrumental in our project, of course, working on the case study Spain, but your other research is very much focused on the far right as well, so academic and applied science at the same time. He's going to talk to us about extremist threats on places of worship. Next, we're very happy to have Stuart MacDonald from the Swansea University, all the way from Swansea. And also the Voxpol Institute. I think people who do research on online extremism know Voxpol very well by now. He's going to talk to us about implementing, enforcing, and complying with the EU's terrorist content online regulation. So this is a presentation looking a little bit at the measures that are being taken to address the online threat, which has become, of course, extremely high lately. And then we're going to have also an online contribution from Rebecca Entricht from the University of Hamburg, who will talk to us about a very large German research project that also involves the security actors as well. And it's on the monitoring system and transfer platform radicalization, MOTRA, It's a monitoring project looking at various kinds of threats, online, offline, also against politicians, for example. Yeah, this is something that we have heard recently again in the US. So these are, I think, really top cutting-edge research and researchers who will inform us about the hate threat landscape at the moment. And with this, I'm going to give the floor to Eric. Guys, 15 minutes. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So I have the pleasure of presenting first on this topic of online hate. And before I get into my presentation, I first wanted to address why we are even talking about online hate in the context of the security of places of worship in the first place, because it might not be that obvious. So without taking too much away from the following presentation of Jose Luis, when we mapped the threat landscape of religious communities and places of worship, we found that online hate and hate campaigns rank pretty high on the priority list of religious communities in terms of the perceived threats. And more importantly, what we also found is that even offline violence, so attacking community members, vandalism, attacking places of worship, nowadays tend to be driven by online hate. So unlike maybe 20 years ago when most of terror attacks and violence against religious communities was perpetrated by organized groups, extremist organizations, and members of them, nowadays the majority of these attacks and incidents tend to come from and be perpetrated by individuals that are not members of any extremist groups, any extremist structures. It's more like they are, so to say, everyday individuals. They consume a lot of content online, primarily on social media, and they self-radicalize over time to the extent that they get to the point where they actually go out and commit violence, whether that's in the form of vandalism or whether that's attacking a member of religious community. But it tends to be driven by online developments. Now, this is not a completely new phenomenon. This existed 20 years ago as well. But as you can also see in the title of my presentation, the new thing is that it has become somewhat mainstream. So this right-wing hate that I'm going to talk about, the primary aspect that we have found in the past 5 years is how it's gotten mainstream. That it also indicates a certain shift in the strategic priorities of far-right organizations. So again, instead of mainly acting in exclusive small groups, terrorist organizations, the strategy now much more looks like they are trying to affect a large share of society, are trying to radicalize the masses, so that they can maintain this plausible deniability. They can say that they themselves did not carry out any violence, they did not perpetrate attacks. It was mainly the content that they push out online that then drives these individuals towards carrying out attacks and, for example, also vandalism. Okay. Presentation doesn't seem to work either. Just give me a second. All right, in that case, I'll just keep talking. So from the perspective of far-right organizations, if you would like to shift to this strategic framework of mainstreaming hate, there's mainly two things that you need to achieve, right? You need to, at first, reach a lot of people. And you can do that. Nowadays, the easiest way to do that is by going on social media platforms, particularly major mainstream social media platforms, and putting out content there online. Because as we all know, most people in our societies are active on these social media platforms. But that's not enough. You're talking about extremist organizations. So normally, if they put out content there with their ideologies, on most platforms, especially the mainstream platforms, their users, their content is going to be removed. Moderation still exists. It still seems to work. So the other thing that they need to do about this is they need to maintain this presence on the social media platforms, right? Because it's not enough if they put out content, but the next day it gets removed. That's not going to help them reach these people. So here's the framework that I'm talking about. So here on the left-hand side, maintaining presence on major social media platforms. But like I said, if they keep getting removed, the users get removed, the content gets removed, it's not going to get them to that objective. So they came up with two different strategies on addressing this. The first one is rebuilding accounts. So even if these accounts get removed, they tend to have so-called backup accounts. So even prior to them being removed, they have an alternative account. And their followers can then basically follow both accounts, the main accounts that they use, as well as the alternative accounts. And even if the main one gets removed due to moderation, the alternative one is already there. And it's like a seamless transition. They just can continue to push out content. They also use what we call a cross-platform ecosystem. So basically not just using TikTok, not just using Instagram or these mainstream platforms. It's more like a web of different social media platforms where they cooperate. And they also use, for instance, Telegram, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. They use Telegram to organize campaigns to rebuild these accounts that were previously removed, as well as to boost content on TikTok. But what we have found is that they are now increasingly shifting towards trying to avoid getting removed in the first place. That is more efficient for them. They can get to keep their followers, their main accounts. So they try to evade moderation. And they do so by changing their communication strategy. So unlike 20 years ago when, for example, neo-Nazis and far-right parties were much more upfront about the ideology, about their objectives, what they want societies to look like, nowadays, they are working actively to conceal this hate. But the thing is, it's just the messaging that has changed. It's not the content, actually. The ideology is still the same as it was 20 years ago. But they conceal this, first of all, by using what we call borderline content. So others often refer to borderline content as awful but lawful. They find this gray area that does not go against the policies of social media platforms, so it doesn't get removed. It's not illegal. Authorities cannot really do anything about it. But it is still fairly hateful. It's a lot of suggestive content. It's a lot of implied hate, which makes it really difficult to do something about it. And the second way that they conceal hate is a specific framing strategy. So the way they talk about and the way they set up these narratives is, again, not openly hateful, but the different elements as they get together into a narrative, it is really efficient. It conceals hate, but it still conveys the far-right message, conveys the hate that they want to spread and also that affects religious communities. Now, getting to the other side, reaching a lot of people on its own is not going to be sufficient to mainstream their hate. Luckily, in our societies, people, if they see far-right hate that is really direct, really upfront, they're not going to like it. So the other thing from the perspective of the far-right that they need to achieve to get to this mainstreaming is that they need to convince people that this messaging is not radical, that this is what needs to be done, and it is actually important. So to convince people, they need to make their extremist ideas more palatable, more acceptable. And they, again, do so by creating urgency on the one hand, and on the other hand, providing sources. So the way that this works is, like I said, there is this framing strategy that I'm also going to get back to a bit more about that on later. They make people believe that there is an existential threat to their way of life, to their children, their grandparents, the loved ones, unless they act. So they create urgency that then makes these people more likely to accept ideas that are maybe seen as radical, but then people are more likely to say, yes, it might be a bit radical, but it is necessary because there is an existential threat against me or my existence. On the other hand, they also provide sources. So as you probably, most of you know, extremist ideologies tend to involve a lot of misinformation and disinformation, conspiracy theories as well, that are not that plausible. But what the far right has done is they built up their own media outlets, their own media ecosystem, so to say, and they make it seem like these are legitimate news outlets. They are websites, they look like every other news outlet, basically. But the content that they put out and the news coverage is full of this disinformation, yet to society, it might still seem like this is plausible because there are sources for these claims, that there is reporting on this. So by linking to these alternative sources, they basically provide sources to these arguments and disinformation, making it more likely to be believed. And now on these four strategies that you can see on the bottom, I'm going to tell you a bit more. So the online ecosystem across the platforms that I talked about, again, going back to how it used to be 10 or even 20 years ago, it was more like extremist groups use mainstream platforms to identify vulnerable individuals, but then lure them away to to smaller platforms that are not that well moderated, try to radicalize them there and have them join these small exclusive groups. Now, to keep this short, this has completely seems to have reversed. So what we found is that we looked at the links between within the far-right ecosystem that we found, and we looked at how many links can we find going from Telegram, which is more of a fringe platform, less moderated, going to TikTok, versus links going from TikTok to Telegram. And what we found to our surprise is that, unlike we expected, the far-right is not trying to lure users away from TikTok anymore to Telegram. It's more like the other way around. So they use Telegram, like I said, to boost content, organize campaign, but the priority is not luring users away. It's more like focusing on TikTok and reaching the masses effectively to have this messaging be effective. Anecdotal evidence how this whole thing works is a German Telegram channel where you can find tutorials on how to create TikTok content that goes viral. Such channels are also used to rebuild backup accounts. So for example, a major far-right account on TikTok gets banned. The next day you would see a campaign on Telegram saying, hey, my account got banned. Here's my new one. Please follow it. Please like it, repost it. And then within days, the reach of the new account is basically back to normal, what it used to be before the ban. They also use it for content mirroring, so basically making sure that even if an account gets removed, the content of that account is mirrored onto other accounts, so it's not disappearing, as well as to boost content. Like I said, the algorithm is really important nowadays, especially on TikTok, so by liking, reposting, and commenting on posts, the algorithm thinks that that piece of content is important, and it's more likely to recommend it to others that are not involved in that ecosystem. Here is the TikTok part of the far-right ecosystem that we have found, without going into detail, just to show you that this is a joint effort of the far-right. It's not like it's only right-wing populist parties that are pushing this content on TikTok. It's not just neo-Nazis, it's not just the alt-right. It's basically every single corner of the far-right that we could find. And the interesting thing is that while there tends to be conflicts between these different parts of the far-right, the ecosystems online are really intertwined, so they're close together. It's one ecosystem. It's not like the neo-Nazis are isolated on their own, and then there's a bubble with the far-right populists. They all interact with each other. So I don't want to say that this is a concerted effort by the far-right or that it's coordinated in any sense. It's not a conspiracy. Some of it might be coordinated, but the point is that all parts of the far-right actively take part in this mainstreaming effort. Two more things that I would want to highlight is that obviously hate and far-right hate is still a mostly male phenomenon, so it's mainly men pushing this content, but we are seeing an increasing share of females involved that are highly active in the scene that also put out hateful content. We found that of this ecosystem, at least 16% of the users were female. At least 7% were minors too, so under 18, young people are increasingly getting involved in these circles as well. And just to show that this is really not an isolated phenomenon, when you look at the numbers, the averages of this ecosystem, the average user of these 142 users that are far right, they have over 12,000 followers. When you look at the average number of likes per user, over 200,000. So this is not something that only addresses a tiny part of society or only reaches a tiny part of society. This is really a mass phenomenon. Now, coming to the convincing people part and the concealing hate part, we looked at how prevalent open, so direct, explicit hate is. And what we found is that using different classifiers, we came to the conclusion that overt hate is really not that frequent on platforms. Kind of implies that moderation works on the one hand, and on the other hand, the far right is also reacting and adapting strategies. By not using overt hate, they want to evade moderation and much more likely to use implicit hate. Now, another surprising finding that we had is that TikTok, a mainstream platform, tends to be more openly hateful than fringe platforms such as Telegram or other even smaller platforms, which surprises. But like I said, overt hate is fairly rare. Instead, what we have found a lot of is what we call implicit hate or borderline content. So some of you might know the term dog whistles. Like I said, it's a lot of suggestive content. They are not saying it out loud that they do not want certain religious communities to be part of our societies, that they want them gone. that maybe used to be a thing 20 years ago, not anymore. Instead, they use memes and suggestions to still convey this message without saying it out loud and maintaining plausible deniability. So 3 examples that I brought you to make this a bit more concrete, what we mean by implicit hate. The first picture is a post from TikTok. It is a picture of the German national football team, and the caption is, without direct translation, is that that national team is only partially German anymore. Now, is this openly racist? No, it is not. But are those people that are more likely to find the messaging of the far right appealing going to understand what is meant by only partially German? Yes, pretty obviously. Or again, spreading hate against religious communities on the second meme, the usual far-right conspiracy theory that there is a global elite that controls everything, and that global elite is also implied to come mostly from the Jewish community. So you have the symbol of the Jewish community and then connected with different parts of our society. So for example, media, banking, government, Hollywood, the 1%. So again, this is not directly and openly hateful, but it is still pretty obvious what the message is here. Or the third one, which is a narrative against migration, posting a headline from 2003 saying Dublin, one of the safest cities in the world, and in 2024, Dublin ranks among the top 10 most dangerous major cities in Europe, and the caption saying diversity effect. So again, it is pretty obvious what is meant here, but it is somewhat suggestive so that it's not that easy to remove this kind of content. It's not that easy to take action against this kind of content. And then to conclude with the framing strategy, why would everyday people even care about these messages and narratives of the far right? It is because they use this very specific framing strategy that focuses, first of all, on identity politics. So they cast this web really wide. They try to get as many people on board as possible. So if in our sample you're Austrian or German, you're Christian, you are part of what they call regular people, you're traditional or heterosexual, then most likely you are going to find some narratives that cater to you or at least address you. Now, what they also do is they address everyday problems that are indeed relevant for most people in society. So we're talking about the topics of inflation, crime, corruption, the perceived demise of the country, or even censorship. So that's how they get the attention of people on social media. They're not talking about ideology. They're talking about news headlines that also are important to people. When things are getting more and more expensive in the stores, when they cannot afford groceries, then obviously they're going to pay attention to messages and posts on social media, why this might be. Then they find enemies. They identify scapegoats. So they blame this always on really vague groups. So for example, migrants, it could be Muslims, it could be the so-called elites or establishment. So the message is always the problem is not you, it's not your responsibility. Someone is responsible for this. And the more vague the group, the better for them, because you cannot really confirm, is it really the elites that are behind inflation? You cannot confirm that, but it sounds good. There's a psychological mechanism behind this that, oh, it's not my issue, it's not my problem, it is being done to me by the elites. So I have an enemy to blame this on. And then most importantly, what I mentioned already, this creating urgency part, the motivational strategy, they always frame these issues as an existential threat. So what this does to the audience is that it conveys that unless I do something, my own existence is threatened. The existence of my country, and is always linked back to the identity. My identity as a Christian person, as a regular person, my traditions, my children, my grandparents, unless I do something, these are not going to exist. And this is how they trick people into accepting more radical ideas because they feel like they have no other choice. And now, really the conclusion, why is this even an issue? What are the implications short-term and long-term? So this hidden mainstreaming of extremism, because most people do not even get it, that this is happening, that the extremist ideas are getting more and more accepted in public discourse, it's not seen as radical and extreme anymore. It's just a normal position within these conversations. So these ideas seem less extreme. It convinces these viewers to adopt far-right positions, which in turn then builds societal support for dangerous views that again then in turn either turn into electoral success, so far-right parties becoming a part of governments in Europe. We're seeing that happening in the recent years. Or even if they did not make it into governments, there's still a base for societal support for these dangerous laws that, again, then bringing this back to religious communities, can turn into laws that threaten religious communities. It takes away the protection of religious communities, the freedom of religion. So that is the short-term implication, but there's a bigger issue when we look at the long term. So by doing all this, especially with the alternative news outlets, they erode democracy by breaking trust. They undermined established media and democratic systems. It makes people more likely to believe the far-right's radical ideas through these alternative sources. It polarizes societies. And what it then really boils down to in the long term that I think is going to be a major issue in the West is that if people do not know what to believe anymore, cannot agree about basic facts anymore, then finding common solutions will become impossible. A democracy is not going to work if we cannot agree what are the problems and what are the realities. So both short-term and long-term, online hate is becoming more and more important for the security of religious communities, and not only in terms of online bullying, because it does turn into offline violence as well. And like I said, if these democratic protections of religious communities are going to be gone in the long term, then we have much bigger issues to deal with. So I will conclude here, and then I think we have now 5 minutes for the Q&A in case there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Indeed, we have 5 minutes for questions. Of course, we'll have a session also at the end if something pops up later. But at this point, if anyone has a question, please raise your hand or a comment. We also take comments. Perhaps we should also mention that one of the reports, one of the deliverables is also there on the table. You can have a look, take it home. There's also a policy brief with implications of the findings of this research. So perhaps, Eric, just a very short question to you. This project has been obviously on Austria and Germany, on basically the German-speaking ecosystem. Do you think there are parallels to other countries or even with the US in terms of what you found?
Great question, yeah. Certainly, so we looked at the German-speaking ecosystems, but I skipped that slide. We can also see that TikTok is not just an issue in Germany and Austria. We just recently had the Romanian presidential elections that had to be repeated, partly because of a TikTok campaign that the courts discovered. We just saw the assassination of 2 members of the Democratic Party in the United States. So this is not an isolated German or Austrian phenomenon. This is happening all across Europe, all across the West, I might say. While these scenes are somewhat separate, what we're also seeing, especially among minors, that the far-right scene is becoming more and more international. So these young people are networking with other young people in other countries. Language is not an issue anymore. Even if they're 12 or 14, they already speak English. So all these strategies, they are learning from each other. The narratives they take from the US, then the US actors take narratives from the German-speaking countries. So this is really becoming a widespread phenomenon that affects the entirety of Europe.
Oh, we have a question in the back. There's a mic coming your way.
This is a simple question. Can we have the copy of your presentation?
Of course, yeah. We're glad to provide that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I guess we're going to continue with the next presentation at this point, just in the interest of time. I think it was really a lot to digest and none of it good news. So in any case, you're definitely invited to also think and perhaps ask questions a bit later when we looked also at the other topics on our list. Just to mention that we're also doing an online streaming at the moment on YouTube. So technically wise, it's very complex, but I think now we're good to go. So Jose Luis, it's your turn on the topic of extremist threats on places of worship. Should be the same presentation.
So thank you very much, Daniela. It's a pleasure to be here. this morning after 2 years of hard work in this project. So it's a pleasure to share this room with all of you. Well, the thing that I'm going to present today is part of the Work Package 2 research that we did at the first stage of the project. Based on the case studies that we identified, which I am going to go very quickly through the methodological considerations. We considered violent attacks and hate crimes against places of worship, in which we identified cases against mosques, churches, and synagogues. We have selected a total of 25 case studies from 13 European countries, the 10 for the consortium, plus Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Then we considered the time frame from 2012 to 2023, and the key variables that we have analyzed are 4. First, the ideology of the perpetrator or the group, depending on the case, the type of attack, which means violent attack or hate crime, and its development, which means the modus operandi, the development, and so on. The third variable, which is the presence and the relation between the online and offline dimension, and the last variable is the system of a manifesto or not. You can see at the right hand of the slide a few instances of the cases that we have analyzed. In this sense, we have carried out analysis dividing it between the ideology of the perpetrator or the group that committed the act and the place of worship which has been targeted, which amounts the total of the 25 mentioned study cases. So let's go directly with the analysis. First, we have the cases from the far-right extremism, in which we identify 3 different groups or 3 different categories of far-right that committed acts against places of worship. The first is the extreme right, which we consider the extreme right those more violent, those more closer to the fascism and to the neo-Nazi ideologies. And we identified few instances of online calls to commit violence against synagogues. One of them was in Italy, and was a guy that wanted to commit an attack and to express it in their social media against the local synagogue in his city. Then we saw a few, I think that the 2 cases of extreme right activists who were acquiring knowledge for making homemade weapons, which could be homemade bombs, but also to acquiring knowledge on how to build a gun with 3D printers. And then we have to divide the cases of the extreme right that we identified between the cases of the lone actors, but also cases from group attacks. We saw that in the case of the lone actors, they try to copy the modus operandi of the attacks in Christchurch in New Zealand. And they are the cases in Bærum in Norway and the case in The Halle in Germany, in which the offenders wanted to attack, in the first case, a mosque, and in the second, a synagogue, live streaming the shooting. And also there is a trend that was common in both cases, which was they tried to commit this attack in a holiday for these religious communities, because they think that in these days the place of worship will be more crowded, so the lethality of the attack will be higher. On the other hand, we had the cases of the group attacks, in which we identified a couple of cases of firebomb and homemade bomb attacks, in both cases against mosques. Then we have the second category, the third millennium fascism. When we talk about third millennium fascism, we're talking about this kind of groups that defend xenophobic, nativist positions. Their modus operandi, beyond the attacks against places of worship, of the acts against places of worship, is characterized because they are copying the strategies or the initiatives of the traditional far left. When I am referring to is to this kind of solidarity initiatives for the working class, but in this case under the view of the nativists. So they only consider the working class, those that are white. As Eric mentioned, they have they frame this opposition between us versus them in this way. So in the cases of third millennium fascism, we saw two clear cases, the generation identity here in Austria, but we have also the cases of Hogar Social in Spain, which are clearly identified by being cases of hate incidents and by the combination of hybrid campaigns, the combination of online and offline hate campaigns, in which they carry out some acts in person here in Austria to put a sticker around, hateful stickers around the mosque, but in the case in Spain, they try to attack the mosque through the use of flare bombs and so on. At the same time that they are spreading a huge and a strong hateful speech through the social media. The last or the final aim of doing this is to reach a higher media impact in social and traditional media to be well known, and also to see if they can gain sympathizers and to recruit more people for the group. Last but not least, we have the populist radical right parties, which they are not characterized by committing directly attacks against places of worship, but they contribute through their xenophobic and hateful speeches to the polarization of the public opinion and to spread hate against religious communities. Two common acts are the burning of Qurans in front of the mosque in order to provoke a reaction from the religious community. And on the other hand, we have the protest against the construction of mosques, in which we have seen several instances from different countries in this case. Concerning jihadi extremism, we analyzed less cases, but we saw that these are the most lethal attacks and always attacks against churches. This is a phenomenon more identified by being mainly long actors, which means that they weren't very well prepared to carry out the attack, and they normally use improvised weapons such as knives and so on. But we identified a case of a cell, which was a case against a church, a well-prepared shooting in France in 2016, and the offenders after the attack claiming loyalty to Daesh. So here we also see like a different evolution between concerning the time frame. The previous attack is more a case of a cell, but the other ones which happened later are more characterized by long actors. So we saw also the evolution in the terrorist threat. In the case of left-wing extremism, we have two cases, one from the insurrectional anarchism against a church in Athens, which was a bomb attack. And on the other hand, we have an attack or an incident from PKK sympathizers against a Turkish mosque in Germany, characterized by the vandalism, which was the smashing the windows of the mosque, and they also recorded the act to proclaim or to reivindicate the act as an act of revenge for an attack of the Turkish army in the Kurdish area of Turkey. The last category that we have others. With others, we include non-identified but also non-ascribed individuals or groups that committed acts against places of worship. Most of them are cases of vandalism, which ranges from hateful graffitis, arson attempts, destruction of symbolic and sacred places, thefts, smashing windows, and destruction of furniture. And we saw different tendencies in these cases. When it comes to churches, we have cases of thefts and arson. Well, but when we have cases of mosques and synagogues, normally non-identified individuals or groups, we have cases in which these people try to spray painted graffitis in the walls of the places of worship with far-right symbology and xenophobic slogans. Also, another cross-cutting trend in the different countries under study is the leaving of pork pieces in the vicinity of the mosques when they are already constructed, when they are already built. But also when the Muslim community wants to build a mosque in some areas. Last, we are going to address the discussion. Of course, we have to consider that these are general trends, so depending on the country, we will have variation because we have different historical developments, we have different relevance of the different religious community depending on the country, so this is something to have in mind. But considering the online dimension, we have identified the hate hybrid campaign from the far left, but also from the far right, which is very important to understand how the threat evolves. Also, we have to consider that the online dimension is the place in which we can identify the manifestos published by the offenders. When it comes to ideology, we have seen different ideologies from less to more violent, and what all of them have in common is this framing of the otherness to try to frame the religious communities as part of an out-group which is not part of the community, and they are always portrayed through the hateful and hate messages and so on. Another important thing is to consider the key presence of non-ascribed or non-identified individuals that commit attacks or acts against the places of worship. The last variable to comment here is the type of incident. When it comes to left-wing extremism and jihadism, we have observed more direct forms of violence in terms of using bomb attacks or knives in order to kill people. But when it comes on the other side to the right-wing extremism, we saw that it varied depending on the number of perpetrators. And when the incident is carried out by the group, by the far-right group, normally it is more a violent act, a violent incident, but when it is, on the contrary, when it is a group, it is more characterized by being a hateful incident, but when it is a lone actor, the attack is normally a violent attack. Also, depending on the ideological branch, when you have more groups closer to the extreme right, to the neo-Nazism, fascism, we have more violent attacks. While you have those groups more closer to the radical right, we have identified more hateful incidents. Concerning the manifesto, we have seen that there is a higher presence of manifesto in the cases of lone actors from the right-wing extremism, but also in the cases of jihadism. That's all from my side. I hope that it has been enrichful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, José Luis, also for keeping to the time. That was excellent. Whilst people are thinking perhaps about questions or comments they might want to address to you, I just wanted to mention how important it is and how clear it was to see the connection between the online sphere and the offline sphere. So basically how it feeds off of each other and the kind of potentialities that you can see. You have an online campaign, then you have a violent act offline, or the other way around, as we had also in Austria, with the offline acts that then become viral. Online and the potential of this hate. This was, I guess, an overview of several countries. I was wondering if you'd like to say something specifically on Spain, and perhaps because I know you've worked on this as well, the sources of what's going on in Spain, of the kinds of violence that we see.
Yeah, in Spain, violent attacks are normally weird, to say in that way. We have the case of the attack against a priest in Algeciras 2 years ago, but normally are more characterized by the hateful incidents. It could be against the Christian community in form of arson, in form of theft, or in form of graffiti with hateful messages. But in the case of the Muslim community, it's more concerning because we saw a lot of campaigns, hybrid or not, from far-right groups that try to make them feel uncomfortable through they can smash the windows, they can paint graffitis with hateful messages, but also it is combined with this kind of, and I think it is a common trend in all European countries, of anti-immigration campaigns and xenophobic views with Muslims and so on. So in general, in Spain is more or less like this.
Yes, indeed. I think this is also something that maybe perhaps makes us underestimate the danger of especially the far-right activities, because they're not that often overtly violent, right? But it reaches a lot more people, and it's a more, just to say, a long-term effect. Well, thank you so much. Oh, actually, we have a question, or perhaps a view from France.
Thank you, Jose. Can we just get back to the identification of the last slide? Oh. Yeah, if you can. Yeah, about the type of incident and how to identify this incident, because we as researchers, we identify them according to some structure and so on. Politics, I did, especially when we are talking about far right, politics are identifying them differently. And the governmental report also, when it comes to far right, it's identified also differently. In the case of France, for instance, all anti-Semitic attack is designed as anti-Semitic. Other religion like Islam or Christian religion or so on, they are coming under racist attack. So when we make the identification of a religious incident, we cannot really define if it's about religion or about racism in different ways. So because the word Islamophobia, for instance, in France, politically is not accepted. So we cannot really identify. When it comes to also far-right incidents, most of the time the media, they won't identify it as a far-right incident, but someone who's psychologically unstable or who have different. And here it's right, when it comes to jihadism, we have a direct form of violence and a direct form of identification. We know the word that we were going to use when it comes to jihadism, terrorism. However, when we come to far-right attack, most of the time, for instance, lately in France, we had a stabbed person in a mosque. He was stabbed. I think you had it as in your 50 times, I think. And the prime minister took 2 days to react to the stabbing, for instance, and calling it as a person who has a far right, because he posted videos and so on. That's why we had to call him this way. If not, it won't be identified as a far right movement, even if the person is really from, I mean, extremist movement. Sorry, it's not only far right, but extremist movement. That's why when it comes, we had in France, when we made the work of identifying the different attacks, when it came to anti-Semitic attacks, it was clear, the governmental report was clear about it. However, when even I went to the Bureau of Cult and discussing about how can I make the difference, they said they cannot, it's a political decision. It's a political decision, and when it will be decided to call them as an Islamophobia or Christianophobia or homophobia or so, we can do it, but unless now it's only recent. That's why as a researcher, we do the interviews and go see people and have this testimony from the people themselves, but if not, we don't have this, I mean, in the case of France, I don't know if in other, yeah, I believe that it may be the case in other countries, but I know that in France, it's our problem when we talk about types of incidents. So that's why it's very interesting when you said direct form of violence and depending on number, because the number that they are giving in general, is he far right or not? Because most of the time he's psychologically unstable or so on. So that's very interesting. Thank you.
I think that this is two things and are two gaps. You know, we know that across Europe there is different legislations that have different understandings on what is to be part or recognized or not different forms of discrimination. So we have different hate crime laws in different countries. So this is one gap to see how prosecute, because in Spain it's the same way than in France. Islamophobia is not yet recognized yet, so this is a racist incident. But at the same time, we had the other gap when we are talking about terrorism or not, depending on the ideology. If we are talking about a far-right group, which is constituted as a group, there is a clear identification and they commit a violent act directly, everybody recognizes it as a violent act or far-right terrorism. But when it is not such direct, the violence, in Spain, I think they are prosecuting it through the hate crime in order to prosecute the far-right in some way. But there is another gap across Europe.
That's true. So it's not only the difficulties that we have within academia to define things, but then, of course, we have, again, the differences in legislation and various political interests that makes our lives even more difficult. But I think we did quite a good job, and there were lots of discussions within the project. How do we define what? There's a huge Excel sheet and a methodology on how to gather these incidents. But anyways, are very useful discussions and something that should be out there. Thank you so much, Jose Luis. We're going to so we're going to go a little bit over to what can we do about all this hate, right? And terrorism content, of course. And I will invite Stuart to join us on stage. I think, yeah, you just flip it with this. Thank you. All right.
Hey, good morning, and thank you first of all to the organisers for the invitation to present today. I'm going to talk about a different EU-funded project. It was also funded by the EU Internal Security Fund. It was called Tech Against Terrorism Europe, known as TATE, and it looked at supporting smaller hosting service providers, HSPs, so how to support these smaller HSPs and competent authorities in the implementation of the terrorist content online regulation, so the TCO regulation. The previous two presentations have already shown the importance of tackling online hate. And what I'd like to do in this presentation is illustrate some of the lessons learned from tackling TCO, from tackling online terrorist content, because these hopefully will inform those efforts to tackle online hate. And so I'm going to present some of the findings from one part of the Tate project, in which we interviewed HSPs and competent authorities about their experiences. So first of all, to begin, an introduction to the TCO regulation. It was first proposed back in 2018 and came into force on the 7th of April 2022. So we now have about 3 years experience of it. Its flagship measure is the removal order. So competent authorities are able to issue an order requiring an HSP to either remove terrorist content or disable access to it in all member states. Once the order has been issued, the HSP must remove the content as soon as possible and in any event within 1 hour. A company that systematically or persistently fails to comply with removal orders can be fined up to 4% of its global turnover. Removal orders can operate across national boundaries. So a competent authority can issue a removal order against an HSP that's based in another EU member state. And companies that are based outside of the EU must designate a legal representative within a member state. And that country is then treated as if it were the company's place of main establishment. And to facilitate communication and coordination in these cross-border cases, Europol has developed a tool known as PERSI. And this is used to avoid the duplication of identical removal orders and for deconfliction. As well as removal orders, there are also specific measures. So these apply where an HSP has been exposed to terrorist content. And they require the HSP to then choose specific measures to protect its platform against further dissemination of terrorist content. So this could include automated tools, automated content moderation tools, but it doesn't have to be. It could be other measures such as appropriate staffing or reporting mechanisms for users. The regulation also says that Europol and member states can continue to make informal referrals. So they can continue to informally refer content to HSPs for them to then voluntarily assess whether the content violates the platform's terms of service. And it's important to note that to date, the number of informal referrals has vastly outnumbered the number of removal orders. The regulation also places various obligations on hosting service providers. These relate to content preservation, transparency, and user complaint mechanisms. For their part, member states must designate a competent authority that has responsibility for issuing removal orders, issuing specific measures, and imposing penalties. And most member states have selected a law enforcement or administrative agency. And competent authorities themselves must publish transparency reports and ensure the right of both users and HSPs to an effective remedy. Now, the TCO regulation has faced significant criticism on human rights grounds, in particular the right to freedom of expression. And these criticisms have focused on the potential for over-enforcement, the potential chilling effect on speech, and this in particular is a concern for minority groups, which I think is quite relevant today, because many of these minority groups are religious communities, and so this also impacts the right to freedom of religion. And there are concerns about whether decisions to issue removal orders receive sufficient scrutiny. Another set of concerns has to do with the impact on small and micro platforms who may lack the capacity to comply with the 1 hour removal window. So to try to address this, the regulation says that the nature and size of the company should be considered by a competent authority when deciding whether to penalise an HSP for a violation. So that's the context of the regulation. Some details on the methodology of the study. We had 23 interviewees, 15 were from HSPs. We didn't interview anyone from the biggest tech companies because we wanted to capture the perspective of smaller companies. And then we also had 8 interviewees from competent authorities. The interviews were conducted between late 2023 and summer 2024. Some were conducted in person where possible, others were on Zoom. They were semi-structured to try and ensure consistency, but also some flexibility in the questions that we asked. And they lasted between 29 minutes and 1 hour. And we anonymised all interview transcripts to provide some reassurance to participants that they could speak openly and honestly. So looking at some of the themes that emerged. Well, the regulation says that the term content, when we talk about terrorism content, content can refer to text or to images or sound recordings or videos or even live streaming of terrorist attacks. I won't go through the definition of terrorist content itself. You can see an overview on the slide. It's taken from Article 2.7. The only point to add to what's on the slide is that the regulation does include an exemption for educational, journalistic, artistic and research materials and materials that are shared in order to prevent terrorism. So how do competent authorities try and locate TCO? Well, primarily they rely on in-house open source intelligence investigators, so in-house OSINTers. None of the ones that we spoke to use automated means. It's all manual work, although some said that they had plans to try and develop automated tools in the future, such as web crawlers. And these OSINT investigators also made use of information provided by other organisations. For example, other units within national police might provide information, and Europol also provides competent authorities with a file that contains the latest keywords, symbols, pictures, flags, icons, and emojis. Competent authorities felt that there was no real need to explain the TCO regulation to the biggest tech companies, because the biggest companies already have access to their own legal advice, and they're already confident that they understand the definition of terrorist content. But in stark contrast to that, interviewees expressed their concern that small and micro companies struggle to comply with the demands of the regulation. So they emphasized the limited capacity of smaller platforms, and they highlighted 3 things in particular. The first was lack of relevant legal knowledge. Several interviewees said that they found the regulation's legal terminology difficult, and this was compounded by the various different regulatory regimes, both in national law and in transnational law. The second limitation was subject matter knowledge and understanding. The companies said that they found it very difficult to keep up to date with the latest slang, the latest slogans, and the latest symbols that extremist groups use. And the third constraint was workload. Small companies have a small operations team. In some of the companies we spoke to, it's just one person. And that one person alone is responsible for identifying and removing terrorist content. The second theme from our findings was the relationship between referrals and removal orders. And we found that there were 2 different approaches to the relationship between these two. The most common approach was what I've called the escalatory approach. So this is an incremental approach that begins with the use of informal referrals, and then removal orders are only used if the company ignores the referrals or is receiving a very large number of them. And then specific measures are only used if removal orders are deemed insufficient. So some interviewees offered reasons for preferring this approach. They said it was convenient, it was effective, it results in terrorist content being taken down in most cases without having to go through the formality of a removal order. There was also a feeling that formal removal orders might impede voluntary cooperation and collaborative relationships with tech companies. And then on the company side, some of them said that they preferred receiving a referral, which may have an expected response time of 2 days, rather than a removal order with an expected response time of 1 hour. On the other hand, there is concern that the informal process for referrals shields public authorities from accountability, particularly given the lack of procedural safeguards and transparency mechanisms. And in fact, some tech company representatives have said that some of the referrals they've received in the past are only tenuously connected to terrorism or not connected to it at all. And interviewees also reported having the discretion to depart from an escalatory approach in some cases. So these might be so-called critical cases where an urgent response was needed. And another competent authority said that they would go straight to a removal order if it involved content that might be challenging to identify or to evaluate by the hosting service provider. So the concern with these exceptions is whether they will be applied consistently in practice. So that was the escalatory approach. The contrasting approach I've called the formal approach. So some competent authorities preferred to use removal orders wherever they possibly could. One said that from a democratic perspective, the decision whether to remove content should be made by a governmental body. And this interviewee also claimed that companies prefer receiving removal orders to referrals, because if they get a removal order, they can deny responsibility for removing the content. They can blame it on the competent authority, and this is then presented as being better for customer relations. However, even these competent authorities acknowledged that they did sometimes resort to using informal referrals. And this was when the content in question was felt as it might fall outside the definition of terrorist content. And examples here included borderline content, which Eric talked about, and hate speech. So these competent authorities said that they hoped to see reform of the regulation that would bring hate speech within the scope of removal orders. Well, as I've already indicated, for HSPs, the 1 hour removal window was a cause of grave concern. The interviewees we spoke to described feelings of anxiety that a removal order could arrive at any moment, and they were worried that they might fail to act in time if the order arrived during their lunch break or in the middle of the night. And this challenge was especially acute for companies based outside of Europe, who pointed to the difficulties caused by different time zones. And although the regulation says that the nature and size of the company should be considered in the event of breach, this gave the interviewees very little reassurance. So the companies we spoke to described different strategies that they developed to cope with this demand and of content moderation more generally. And there were 3 strategies that were quite common. The first was simply to ensure that someone was always available to deal with any removal order that might arrive. So one company we spoke to had 6 members in its management team, and they took it in turns to be on call 24/7 for a week. And they said that in the long term, the pressure that this had placed on them as a small team had really begun to take its toll. And they said it was beginning to have quite an impact on their well-being. Now, this is important not only in its own right. They also pointed out that imposing such demands can potentially result in poorer moderation decisions and so ultimately prove counterproductive. Alongside this, some companies had measures in place to ensure that removal orders were prioritized. So one company, for example, had a dedicated email address which they only shared with competent authorities. And on their part, one competent authority talked about ongoing efforts to create an automated tool, which would, when a removal order arrived, this tool would automatically remove the content from the recipient company's platform. The second coping strategy was to defer to those referring the content. So the interviewees justified this by saying that competent authorities have greater expertise. There's a quote from one of them on the screen. "We are incentivized to remove without much or any quality control over the nitpicky details of what that content might be. We defer to a competent authority to know what they're flagging." And this deference extended beyond just removal orders. The company said they also tended to defer to referrals from other organizations that they regarded as expert. And they even said that they defer to automated tools, AI-based tools. So this calls into question the scrutiny process envisaged by the regulation. In practice, interviewees said that limited time, limited capacity meant that subsequent review of the removal of content rarely took place. And they admitted that this probably resulted in over-enforcement. And they did say this was problematic. They said it's problematic for the user whose content is removed, and it's problematic for the companies themselves, because over-enforcement impacts user experience, and it could be detrimental to the growth of the company. The third of the common coping strategies was to outsource content moderation to trust and safety vendors. And this was seen as being the most straightforward option, although some interviewees did warn of a lack of transparency around how these trust and safety vendors define and identify terrorist content. Then the final theme, engagement and non-engagement. In spite of what I've just said, the interviewees we spoke to said there were a number of reasons to try and comply with the regulation, and these extended beyond the simple desire just to avoid sanctions. So some emphasised the importance of compliance to the long-term prospects of success for their company. They also felt that transparency reporting can enhance a company's reputation. It signals confidence to users and advertisers that action is being taken to ensure that the service is safe. But most of all, our interviewees said that they were intrinsically motivated to do their bit in the fight against terrorism online. Competent authorities, meanwhile, emphasised the importance of proactively raising awareness of the regulation. Workshops and networking events like this one today were regarded as particularly important opportunities for information sharing and knowledge exchange. They also gave competent authorities a chance to collect information from HSPs. So one competent authority, for example, said they didn't have a directory of HSPs based in their jurisdiction. So when they were at an event, they asked all the HSPs present to voluntarily provide their contact details. The competent authority collected those and then passed them on to Europol, who then entered them into PERSI. But aside from networking events and workshops, competent authorities said that they'd faced real difficulties making contact with smaller HSPs. And to the HSPs we spoke to, this was quite unsurprising. because they said there are several disincentives to engaging with the regulation. They talked about the amount of investment needed to comply, particularly with transparency obligations.
We need to come to a conclusion,
okay.
time-wise.
So the investment of resource, which could affect the company's growth. And so as a result of this, they said that they resorted to prioritizing the low-hanging fruit. They chose to issue removal orders just against the companies they already had contact details for. And they identified two possible future strategies to try and deal with the problem of non-engagement. One was to assist non-EU companies in identifying a legal representative within the EU, and the other was to enlist the help of internet infrastructure providers. So to conclude, there are 3 points really. The empirical findings from this study provide support for the concerns that have been expressed about protection of free speech. Secondly, the study has raised awareness, I hope, of the impact of the regulation on the well-being of members of smaller HSPs. And then finally, and the point I'd really like to emphasize, is the importance of an ecosystem approach to regulation. As Eric alluded to, and as has been shown in other studies, hundreds of different platforms host terrorist content and online hate content. And yet, by the end of 2023, only 13 different companies had been served with a removal order. So only a very small subset of the online ecosystem is being targeted, and it's that low-hanging fruit that I just mentioned. It's the companies that have proactively chosen to engage and provided their contact details. So this is problematic because you have large segments of the online ecosystem that are not engaging and action is not being taken against. And what this means in practice is that the disruption activity on the compliant, engaging platforms, that disruption activity merely displaces the content onto other platforms that are not engaging and are not being forced to try and comply. And that, I think, is one of the major areas for future reform and focus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It was actually quite surprising for me to see that the companies were actually quite positive to the idea of, removal orders, as in, it wasn't necessarily their responsibility. They could push away the responsibility of it. So this kind of preference for clear instructions rather than be themselves the ones who actually have to analyze and assess to which extent, something should be removed. I was wondering because, obviously with the terrorism content, it might be a bit easier in the sense of, it being more straightforward, as opposed to borderline content and having to decide what is hate speech and what is not. So I was wondering, how do you see the difficulties in removing hate speech as compared to removing terrorism content? And how do you see the Digital Services Act in this context? What I really ask myself is it actually easy to implement on the side of the platforms?
Well, I think, first of all, one of the reasons the companies prefer, or some companies say they prefer the competent authority to issue a removal order, is so that they don't have to make that decision and they don't have to get involved in the challenges of deciding whether content is terrorist or not. Given that online hate is even more difficult to define and to identify in practice, I think that will probably accentuate that perspective even further. So I think companies may well be even more inclined to favour that the governmental agency makes the decision. What they really didn't like so much was the 1 hour removal window, because that just places such intense pressure on the company, particularly if it's a smaller company. In terms of the Digital Services Act, that really signals a different type of approach altogether. So The regulation is based on a takedown model where you identify a single piece of content and then require the platform to remove it. The Digital Services Act moves away from that type of approach, which is based on individualized decision-making, towards an approach that's more based on systemic risk and requiring companies to look at risk factors and take more systemic measures to try and prevent content from appearing in the first place. In my view, that move towards a more systemic approach is good. I think that's necessary because of the sheer volume of content, the tens of millions of items of terrorist content online that are removed every year. And I would imagine the numbers for online hate are even greater. So you need a systemic approach rather than an individualized approach. However, what seems to be happening is that to implement a systemic approach, you have to take legal standards for protection of free speech and try and plug those into often automated systems. So the standards have to then be made operable for an automated system. And so you get some standards that have been developed over decades to protect free speech that are then regarded as not being operable by machines and so are not operationalized. And then you get standards that can be made operable that are used to address systemic risks, but those rules are not consistent with long-standing free speech protections. So in order to use the machines, you end up distorting the standards that exist to protect free speech. So that's the danger, I think, of a more systemic approach.
All right. Yeah. So making things more complicated, right, as it is in the area of hate speech anyway. Well, thank you so much. It was really, really interesting. And because this is something that also concerns lots of the political actors here as well. They seem to struggle with the Digital Services Act. I'm not sure if the other act has been fully processed here already. But it's important to see also other kinds of EU actions that really affect this area and are clearly being improved as we go along. So we are moving now to the last input for our session now. It's going to be Rebecca Entricht, who will join us online. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think you can hear me already. Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Thank you so much for stepping in for the colleague who was called on an emergency basis to the ministry for a briefing that took place at the same time as our conference today. But you are part of a bigger consortium that is looking at various kinds of threats and monitoring them. So the team was able to find a replacement. Thank you so much for joining again. And the floor is yours. So 15 minutes would be ideal, so we can keep to the time more or less, plus minus a few minutes. All right, thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Sure, thank you for the opportunity to talk about the MOTRA project, although I cannot be in Vienna in person. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see my presentation, first of all. That's the most important part, I think. So yeah, I got the hint that we are short on time, so I will dive right into introducing the core idea of the project and presenting some empirical results with a focus on anti-Semitism to give an impression of our monitoring work regarding the threat landscape in Germany. Just see. So MOTRA is a nationwide research cluster of 9 partner institutions across Germany, funded by 3 ministries under the National Security Research Program. The program was initiated in 2019 and is coordinated by the Terrorism and Extremism Research Unit at the Bundeskriminalamt, the German Federal Criminal Police Office. And after an initial funding period until the end of 24, we are now happy to being funded for a second period until March 28. MOTRA pursues 2 overarching goals that can be derived from the name, monitoring system and transfer platform radicalization. The first one, the monitoring system, is an empirical goal in order to establish a nationwide monitoring of radicalization and extremism across different empirical domains and with different viewpoints on the phenomena, especially with right-wing and Islamist radicalization phenomena. The second part, the transfer platform, is the main structural goal to build and institutionalize a so-called knowledge hub for radicalization-related expertise and transfer. Since I myself am mainly involved in the first goal, the focus of the rest of the presentation will be on the empirical objective with findings from 3 of the 9 project partners. All right. So the underlying idea and assumption of our empirical approach is that radicalization is not the cause of societal conflict, but rather a symptom or even an outcome of it. We understand radicalization as a process driven by fear, insecurity, and perceived threats, which are factors that can fuel ideologically charged worldviews in order to cope with those threats or fears. And those worldviews can be expressed by certain attitudes, and they can be strengthened by social and political discourse. And then at the end of the process, there's a risk of criminal or even terrorist behavior. However, I have to say that radicalization does not inevitably lead to violence. So consequently, our aim is to monitor public discourse as well as attitudes and behaviors in the German society to identify critical tipping points in the radicalization process. To do so, several MOTRA partners work together across the 3 core modules that I just mentioned: discourse, attitude, and behavior. And we are synchronizing our research methodologies and findings. And these 3 core modules are further supported by complementary modules such as technology monitoring or protest monitoring or expert panels, which help us maintain a broad, multi-perspective understanding of the radicalization process. And as you can see in the graph, across the time frame of MOTRA, we consistently exchange and match ideas, our methods, and our findings to gain a comprehensive understanding of radicalization and potential relevant risk and protective factors. So in order to give a better idea of what this process of empirical synchronizing looks like, I'd now like to present findings from each of the 3 core modules. And those findings deal with the question of the development of anti-Semitism in Germany, especially after October 7th, 2023. First, on the discourse level, the team at the University of Munich, led by Diana Rieger, conducts internet and social media monitoring with a particular focus on fear speech. And here you can see an analysis of messages from right-wing channels and chat groups on Telegram. And this graph shows how the proportion of fear speech evolves over time and across several issues on this platform. So at first glance, we can see that crises induce a rise in fear speech proportions, regardless of the topic. We could see that for the COVID crisis during 21, this is the first topic. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's the first one. And for the Ukraine war since the beginning of 22. And regarding the question of anti-Semitism, the sharpest increase of fear speech overall since 23 is associated with Israel and Gaza. This is the second from the top, which illustrates how international conflicts are reflected in our domestic discourse and may act as ideological triggers for hate and radicalization. So these were the messages in right-wing Telegram channels, but how are such ideologies expressed and how prevalent is anti-Semitism in the broader society? To examine this, we turn to the attitude level, and at the University of Hamburg, where I work, and at the Giga Institute, we conduct several surveys every year with around 2,000 to 4,000 respondents. But since we don't have a panel structure yet, all analyses that I'm showing you are trend analyses with independent samples. So this slide shows results from our online access panel surveys that are conducted roughly every 2 months. And you can see the development of anti-Semitic attitudes that are represented by 2 statements with the blue lines. And you can see the same statements regarding Muslims representing Islamophobic sentiments with the green lines. And while Islamophobic attitudes are consistently more prevalent in Germany than anti-Semitism, both types of attitudes peak in November 23, shortly after the October 7 attacks and the escalation of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Especially Islamophobic attitudes drop in the following wave and increase again slowly but continually. But anti-Semitic attitudes, on the other hand, while they're generally not as prevalent, they have continued to grow with a higher relative increase until 25. So now in order to shed light on who tends to anti-Semitic attitudes in German society, we can use another set of surveys, the so-called People in Germany surveys of my team of the University of Hamburg. that are conducted annually. And these surveys are representative for the adult German population, but they also include oversamplings of around 1,000 respondents with a migration background and with a Muslim affiliation each, which allows us to conduct robust subgroup analyses. And here we can see the development of anti-Semitic attitudes between 21 and 24 for the total sample of each year and for those three subgroups. The prevalences stem from a scale with 2 items, which is why the numbers are a bit smaller than on the previous slide. What we see is a significant rise of anti-Semitic attitudes from 3.5% to 5.1% in the general population. But if we look at this development in the groups of non-Muslims without a migration background, non-Muslims with a migration background, and Muslims, we see that this increase is attributable to attitudes of people who identify as Muslims, reaching 21% in 24, which you can see on the right side of the slide. And of course, it is important to mention that this is just one descriptive result, and further analyses show that only specific subgroups of Muslims express these attitudes. But this brief overview gives a glimpse into the asset of working with large representative samples that include minority groups in Germany, since such insights are crucial for designing targeted prevention and intervention measures. So the next question in terms of the radicalization process is now, is this a change that we can see on the behavioral level as well? And while we cannot directly infer causality, of course, our third core module, the behavioral monitoring, offers further insight into this. The BKA, so the Bundeskriminalamt, connects nationwide data on politically motivated crime, including hate crimes, for example, targeting foreigners or members of certain ethnic or religious groups, but also places of worship. As was already the case for fear speech and for attitudes, we can indeed see that behavior changed as well after October 7th, and anti-Semitic hate crimes reached a striking peak after this date, far surpassing xenophobic or anti-Islamic incidents, which are depicted here for comparison. Given the previous finding that anti-Semitic attitudes are particularly pronounced among Muslims, does this mean that anti-Semitic crimes are mainly committed by Muslims due to maybe a problematic religious ideology? And the answer that we can give on the basis of the politically motivated crime database is no. The data show that most anti-Semitic hate crimes in Germany are primarily and consistently motivated by right-wing ideology. Still, other ideological motivations, such as foreign ideology or religious extremism, also peaked after the crisis of October 7th, although right-wing extremist ideology remains the dominant driver of hate crimes. So this very brief and very quick insight in our empirical work underscores the important point of having to be careful not to draw direct lines from opinion data to behavioral outcomes, for example. But the results align well with what we've seen on the discourse and the attitude level before. So, yeah, I can switch to the last slide. So these results allow us to inform both empirical reflections and concrete prevention strategies with the goal of creating basically a bridge between science and policy through empirical evidence like this. And this brings me, and this is my second to last slide, very briefly to Motorow's second core goal, the development of a knowledge hub on radicalization. This hub is built around what we call a trialogue, an exchange between science, politics, and practice. And our aim here is not only to communicate empirical findings, but to translate them into knowledge that is relevant and actionable in real-world contexts, for example, by involving actors from civil society. On the right side of the slide, you see some of the national and international partners we already collaborate with, ranging from government bodies to NGOs and research institutions, for example. With our second funding phase now underway, we are deepening and expanding the core elements, which we developed during the first 5 years of the project. We have some key empirical developments that we would like to pursue, for example, a longitudinal approach with panel surveys to capture individual radicalization dynamics over time. And an important step regarding the structural development of MOTRA is the establishment of an international working group made of 10 senior experts from different disciplines. And the goal is to examine whether MOTRA's interdisciplinary and cross-phenomena monitoring approach could serve as a kind of a blueprint for internationally comparative and cooperative research efforts. So with that being said, if you're interested in more information about MOTRA, I can recommend the MOTRA Monitor, which is this book. This one is published every year, unfortunately only in German, but in this book you can find results from all of our project partners, and from our modules, as well as insights from prevention projects. We have more information on our website, where you can also download the book, and otherwise we are thankful for any questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much for, it's your applause. Thank you so much for this really insightful presentation. Also, the way in which you showed us the logic of the project and also addressing a very central question that I think concerns all of us. You know, what is the link between attitudes and behavior, right? So how can we even predict perhaps behavior based on attitudes? I was actually quite impressed to see all the participants in the hub. And I was wondering if you guys are already in contact with the EU Hub on Prevention, which has been established recently. And more generally, I mean, you already mentioned that this international committee is about to be established. But I think one of the questions that maybe many people are asking is this kind of work transferable to other countries, the methodology, the approaches? And well, how easy is it to implement it? Also in terms of funds, but also in terms of, you know, brain power and, you know, how many people are needed for this?
Yeah, great question. And it's also the core question of our newly established or to be established international working group to examine exactly whether this is possible or how it's possible to implement the MOTRA idea in the international context. The EU Hub that you mentioned, our coordinator, Uwe Kammersees from the BKA, he's very much into this and really pursuing this hub that we were talking about. So he's already in contact with those. And there are some questions about the international transfer. For example, the contextual adaptability. For example, if we talk about different cultures or values that are existent in a certain country, how can those be compared between countries? But I think the great asset of MOTRA is the modularity. We have our 9 modules or nine project partners, and in order to be successful, it might help to have some of those modules implemented, but that doesn't mean that you have a 100% need of all of them in every country.
Yes, definitely. And it's also, I guess, a question of definitions, operationalization, the way in which data collection is being done. So also in PARTES, we had internal discussions, but also with authorities, as in, you know, how data is being collected on hate crime, right, on hate speech. So there's a lot of methodological issues and discussions to be carried out. But I think we're all really looking forward to this. Is, you know, the things that we're doing. So we're looking forward to also cooperate with you in the future with PARTESCOM and within this international committee. So I would say thank you so much for the contributions in the panel, and also from you, Rebecca. Really, I cannot say thank you enough for jumping in really in the last minute over the weekend. For us here, and of course, I would like to renew the invitation to visit us in Vienna at the next opportunity. For us here, we have already 1:05, so we only have 5 minutes delay, which is actually quite great for an academic / stakeholder conference. I will invite you guys to join us for lunch, about half an hour until, let's say, 1:35-ish. We will make sure to get you back here for the second and lunch panel. Not lunch panel. It's a lunch break. Now it's going to be an actual panel with discussions on issues, but after the lunch break. So see you guys in a little bit. Thank you so much. We are going to continue now with the second panel, focused more on the countermeasures. It's actually even called Impact and Countermeasures, Protecting the Online and Offline Spheres. We're very happy to have, first of all, of course, Ioana from our own PARTES project, who is going to talk to you about the Guardian approach. Welcome. So this was the lady's first move. The actual first speech presentation is going to be by Marcin Podogrocki. Sorry, during the PARTES.com project, I will learn to pronounce your name. From University of Lodz, who is going to talk to us about a related project to PARTES, which is Prosperous. It's how to say, it's a more hardcore security project, if I may say that myself. You guys had even simulations, so it's a very complementary approach to ours. He will talk to us about security measures, increasing protection for safer places of worship. We also have Kashiv Awan from Enhancing Faith Institutions, also joining us here on the panel and in PARTES.com as well. Also from a related project to PARTES, SOAR, A Legacy of Protection and Resilience. This is the title of his presentation. And with this, I'm going to give the word to Marcin. Please go ahead. 15 minutes? Yes.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this conference and give me the opportunity to share information about the similar project. I will just describe this concept, which somehow could be complementary to PARTES project and the successor of PARTES, PARTES.com. That's something which is important for us, that what we elaborated in our project with the consortium would be extended, mainstreamed with the other projects as well. So, the Prosperous is the project which is conducted in the same call, ISFP, co-funded by European Commission. And our consortium idea was to prepare the, let's say, comprehensive system of protection for large gatherings of people in religious sites. During the project, we try to make it more universal, not only for large gatherings, but also for regular services of small communities as well. And the idea was to cover the whole cycle of the whole spectrum of the system, starting with vulnerability assessment, risk assessment, and then by preparing recommendations, procedures, some changes into the systems, also with in the context of equipment, as well as cooperation with police forces or other first responders, which should act in the face of terrorist attack. And what is very important for our projects, we also try to fill in the gap in the protection system in public places, which is the protection of incidents with the use of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear agents. And our and our university and my Center of Biohazard Prevention, is focused on this type of activities. I mean, filling in the gap between the gap between, let's say, university researchers and the practice in the society. So we try to introduce the outcomes of our research into increasing the level of security in public places. And the measures which we invented was also followed by some modular training, virtual reality, pilot trainings, and also large-scale exercises was organized in this project. The main element of the system is the guidebook on security measures. It's about 300 of pages with some recommendations, procedures, some methodological concepts, how to increase the security, but also a review of technical equipment. And the idea was to present not only very expensive ones, but we're starting with cheap solutions, just not to invest a lot of money to increase the security, but step by step to increase it by small investments. And also it covers also communication protocols it would be implemented between places of worship, staff, and other entities like police or firefighters when they arrive at the moment of the terrorist attack. And this is not only the theoretical guidebook, but also with many tools, tips to be used by security personnel. One example of such a simple tool is vulnerability assessment tool, but in very light version, very simplified. It's for the people with not a lot of expertise in protection. But with use of this template and use of the checklist, they could assess the vulnerability, the vulnerable elements in the object, and also to find some solutions how to increase the protection and how to assess the level of risk in specific areas. And of course, it could be further consulted with the other experts. But this is the first tool to check if the place is safe or not, and where exactly should be some intervention made. The other element is the guidebook with the concept of security by design, especially addressed to religious sites. So several good practices are described there, and some elements that would be followed by administrators, not only in new buildings, but also in historic buildings, or how they could be transferred to be more safe with this concept of security by design. Introduction to civilian threats. As I said, this is a gap in our opinion that should be filled in different public places. I mean the incidents with the use of chemical, biological, or radiological nuclear agents. So in Prosperes we prepared also in a very simple format the basic information about these agents, and also some scenarios of these attacks, and methods how to prevent and how to identify, detect that such kind of attack was happened. And also some information how to react on that, some information about the personal protection equipment, methods of decontamination, evacuation, and so on, to minimize the effect of such attack, to minimize the number of victims. Modular training program, it's about 50 lessons, 50 hours of training course. But fortunately it is in the modular way, so someone who would like to increase the protection in the organization, they could just pick up some topics and constructed the course, for example, only about evacuation, and could be just a few hours course, and all the materials are prepared like training curriculum, like description and instructions for the trainers, and also materials for the trainees with PowerPoint presentations, with checklists and our tools. And also it is ready to be used like a self-learning on the platform. And we prepared also some scenarios for exercising the virtual reality method. So this is the modular training program with many elements to be adjusted to the needs of the organization. Awareness raising, that's occurred to be a crucial point, but it's not enough to prepare the security measures, but you need also to make the conditions to introduce them into the community. So we prepared two documents about the awareness raising strategic point. One was the awareness raising campaign within our project. So several activities were conducted for this reason. And also, what would be also important for the other projects, we prepared the model of raising awareness campaign, a universal one, starting with identification of the problem, the challenge in the community, and then how to plan the raising awareness campaign, how to conduct it, what channels, what measures should be applied, and then at the end how to evaluate the effectiveness of this raising awareness campaign. And this raising awareness strategy is followed with some materials. They are three of them. They are brochures with the content specifically addressed to the needs of the beneficiaries for managers of religious sites. The different scope is for the staff of religious sites and also for the visitors and worshippers. There's also a selection of measures in such a brochure. And some examples of this, some samples are on the table. So please, if you are interested, you can pick some of them at the entrance. The other materials are some posters to be stick on the wall in the place, just to have the procedure on hand when this is needed, with infographic, with very user-friendly way of transferring information, and also some videos about the procedures for training the procedures, about the security by design, how to react to the terrorist attack, to the attack with the use of CBRN, how to conduct the vulnerability assessment analysis, and about the search in the facility or evacuation, is prepared in a version of videos available at YouTube. Most of these materials are in 7 different languages. And one important information is that all the materials on all these results are available at the free license. The only one condition is to acknowledge the Prosperous project as the authors of these materials, and then anyone could use it for training, for our raising awareness, raising awareness, or even for commercial purposes. So once again, it is a past project. Last 2.5 years, our University of Lodz was the coordinator. There was 18 partners. And this project was one in a series of the projects about the public security. They are research projects, but also ISFP projects. 2 of them are coordinated by our universities, are ongoing. One is about the security system of CBRN for hotels and conference centers, and the other one is about the CBRN protection in universities, including dormitories, laboratories, learning rooms, and so on. So quite complex issue to be covered by the protection system. And the other one is PARTES.com. We are a partner of this project. So I hope that the materials prepared, measures prepared in Prosperous would be also transferred and adapted to this project and be offered to all the parties that are interested in increasing the protection of places of worship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcin. So as you guys have seen, these are really very complementary approaches to the protection of places of worship, which is, of course, a complex undertaking. And we're really happy to have you guys in PARTES.com, in which the idea was really to build on what has been done in the previous round of projects and combine these approaches to develop a model, and also, but particularly to make it accessible to the stakeholders in a digitalized manner. And I will not say any more about the PARTES.com because that's the follow-up. In the meantime, perhaps a quick question to you. We've seen in our data collection that the threat landscape is quite different depending on the country. So the mic. So the kind of approach that you had in Prosperous, really looking at serious events involving violence or even terrorism. Have you seen certain places or certain kinds of places of worship that were more affected by this kind of threat than others? Or what would you say that, during the project, what were the places, the countries or the place of worship that were most benefiting, so as to say, from this approach?
Thank you for this question. In fact, that was very different from country to country. And for example, in Poland, there's not, huge awareness of a terrorist threat in religious sites because nothing like that happened in the past. So that was not easy for us to convince people that it is worth to invest some time and money to increase the level of security. In comparison, we have on our project a Jewish community, and they were very, aware of that topic, and they took all our measures just straight away from the project to use it for the training schemes because they feel that they really need something to be prepared, and it's better to be prepared than to respond to the situation afterwards. So I think the difference mostly was between countries and if something happened in the past or not. If yes, there was more easier to convince people to think about the protection.
So even more important to think about this modular approach, right? So to develop solutions and approaches depending on the needs in the field, and also to have a close eye at the national and local context as well. But at the same time, and this is something that I guess all of our projects are trying to do, also to develop solutions at the European level that can be transferred regardless of country or local context. So thank you very much. We're going to move now to another project from the Protect family, to SOAR. This is a little bit of a different approach, I guess, again, very much embedded in the religious and faith communities. And we're really happy to listen to Kashif Awan from Enhancing Faith Institutions. It's going to change.
Hello, everyone. My name's Kashif from Enhancing Faith Institutions based in Dublin. And we were the coordinators of the SOAR project, which started in 2021 and ran until the end of 2023. We had the privilege of being, again, in terms of the call, one of the early-ish projects to start on this ISF-funded kind of projects that working towards the protection of places of worship. The proposal stage started during COVID in 2020, and throughout the duration of the project and it finishing over 2 years ago now, we've had the privilege to attend events like this with other kind of sister projects and share our expertise and look at the synergies and kind of the similar impact that the projects are having. So thank you, Daniela and Stefan and the team for having me here in Austria. Just a quick overview. So what this presentation is going to just provide kind of very kind of highlight level of the impact that we had on the ground. We were working in 7 European countries, Germany, France, Austria, Hungary, Belgium, Holland, and Bulgaria. So we were working across 7 pilot countries, and these are kind of the highlight kind of achievements that we delivered across the projects. It was very much a face-to-face engagement project in terms of there were a lot of trainings that we had to deliver, a lot of risk assessments that we had to deliver across various faiths, across various denominations. So in terms of the kind of highlights, these are what we managed to achieve. We managed to achieve over 50 risk assessments to churches, synagogues, mosques, gurdwaras, and Hindu temples. 50 trainings. These were face-to-face, one-day trainings that were delivered, talking about protective security, bringing in architects, law enforcement, 2 community groups, and these events took place mainly in neutral venues, so we could get a kind of diverse representation of faith communities together to learn from kind of shared experiences and similar threats that they were facing. Throughout the 50 trainings, we managed to train over 1,000 participants from faith communities. These were religious leaders, volunteers, security guards, women, youth, who are associated with places of worship. And as part of that, we managed to deliver 7 national policy dialogue meetings, which again brought together the participants from the trainings with kind of key regional, national policymakers in the different countries that we were working in to share expertise, concerns, feedbacks, and bring these 2 kind of stakeholders together. And then as part of that, we had 2 European-wide retreats, which took place in Munich and Lille, again, bringing together, splitting up the 7 countries. And that was more kind of scenario-based kind of exercises in what we were delivering. All our work in terms of our face-to-face training engagement, this was kind of the community-centric methodology that we utilized. So we worked with large venues, small venues, and kind of medium venues in terms of places of worship. We didn't just go to the kind of the main big cathedrals or the grand mosques. We managed to have a really good representation of the different kind of places of worship across the 7 countries. We had people called CDOs, which were community development officers, in which we utilized in each of the countries that we were working in. These are people within the communities that had the existing relationships that made it easy for us to, again, ensure that we got maximum participation at the training events, and we found that approach to be really good because, again, it allowed us to ensure that there was an interfaith component to our trainings. We didn't kind of, again, focus on specific religious groups, which we found, again, to have most impact moving forward. As part of the project, we had 2 groups of kind of European networks or expertise, and these were the architects panel of experts and an advisory group of experts. So in the architectural panel experts, our partner, the Architectural Council of Europe, managed to, as part of their network, bring together 7 to 8 architects who have experience in security by design, who have worked in kind of public spaces, redevelopment, redesign work. And that expertise group was a real kind of core kind of aspect of our project, providing key feedback and some of the documentation and resources that we developed, as you'll see. And our advisory group of experts, again, had imams, priests, and people with kind of with key networks like the OSCE and the UN provide, again, just feedback and understanding, and provided some recommendations for us on exactly what we can do throughout the project to maximize kind of our output. A key focus on our work was around women and youth, 2 groups which sometimes are looked past when it comes to places of worship, especially around training and security. A lot of our research, a lot of our kind of feedback was these 2 kind of aspects of groups, women and youth, can be seen as being the most vulnerable, unfortunately. And a key part of our work was specific trainings for these two groups. So this was normally a day's training delivered at places of worship mainly. So we did in mosques, synagogues, and churches. Again, one-day trainings, just to kind of providing best practice and understanding around how women and youth, alongside the management of these places of worship, can ensure kind of safety and security, especially regarding like Ramadan for Eid or during Christmas and other religious holidays, just around their safety and security. These are just some images of our risk assessments. As I said earlier, we delivered 50 of these. So there was a pre-report, post-report. So the methodology around this would visit the site, provide kind of a full kind of review of the security. That report then would be sent to the management of the places of worship, and then they had to resolve the key issues, and then we'd go back and then provide them a kind of certificate and a kind of final review to see the changes that they've implemented. So we delivered 50 of those risk assessments. These are just some images from the one-day protected security training programs that we delivered. Again, we managed to engage with the Muslim community, Christian, Jewish, and also the minority groups such as the Sikhs and the Hindus and the Buddhists across the 7 countries we were working in, bringing them together. Most of these communities, unfortunately, hadn't really sat amongst each other and engaged. You'd have a situation where you'd have a religious community a mile, 2 miles down the road from another community, but they had no discussion, there was no dialogue. So what this training did, again, is highlight and open some of those communication channels, which, again, are so important. And these are just some of the kind of images of the trainings and the engagements that we managed to deliver. This is just an image from the SOAR European Engagement Management Retreat. This was something a little bit different, building on the one-day training. This was a bit more detailed, and it was a 2-day event. We did one in Munich and one in Lille around bringing together security experts that would go on to then lead on security in the places of worship that they were representing from. So this was very much scenario based. Over 2 days, we provided scenario on a place of worship being attacked in a specific country, and then in different groups from different countries, they'd come together and kind of put a plan in place, a communication plan, a crisis management plan, kind of present their work, and at the end of it, there was some really, really good feedback and kind of responses on this. So this was very much kind of a scenario-based implementation that we had. These are just some of the national policy dialogue events that took place online and in person across the project. On the security by design, as I mentioned earlier, the security by design architectural experts that we had, this was a core component of the SOAR project. Again, working quite closely to develop set guidelines and expertise on security by design, specifically for places of worship, hadn't been done to a certain extent when we were looking at it. We were liaising quite closely with the EU, who were also producing their guide at the same time. So we managed to have some good dialogue there, and we produced, I think there was 10 of these. These are just some of the ones that we managed to develop around specific focus on security. So again, implementing, security by design for heritage sites, which you can't knock down and rebuild. So how do you improve the security of a heritage site, which you have so many in Europe? Perimeter security, doors, windows, gates, which was really important. So these were put together consulting with the advisory board and the communities on the ground. And at the bottom there, you'll see the Internal Security Fund Sister Projects Guide. When we started this project, kind of these events where different projects were coming together wasn't kind of the norm, but obviously with the EU's kind of guidance and recommendation, we managed to bring together, I think, 7 sister projects on a call to discuss kind of synergies and similarities in the work that we were doing, and that was put together in 2022 in that guide at the bottom, which is still available on the website, which is, again, something we're quite proud of. This is an architectural best practice booklet, again, on the back of working with the kind of architects. We put a call out for best security by design place of worship. So there was, I think, 50 submissions from architects across Europe. I think 7 were then kind of brought to the final SOAR event, in which a winner was voted and selected. And this guide, again, is also available on the website, which, again, is really, really good to see the work being done by architects in terms of protecting places of worship. Communication campaigns, we developed a lot of videos and resources. We designed these up internally. We had 5 million, I think, Twitter impressions. We had 2 million Facebook impressions. We had 20,000 people download resources from the site. So the communication campaign was quite extensive, focusing on various aspect of best practice. Again, these are all available on the SOAR website as well. Handbooks, leaflets, tips and informations there that, again, can be all seen. And then just on some of the legacies, again, you'll see from the SOAR project taken in and implemented into guides from different faiths. This was our German team that managed to get the SOAR project into this guide from the Christian community, which again just highlights some of the legacy that we had. Engagement with local officials. This was actually taken in 2022 after a mosque attack in Aachen. And again, highlighting the local officials. One was the mayor, one was the local member of the parliament in France who attended the training. So again, bringing kind of people that are responsible from a policy perspective to the community to have those discussions and open those communication channels. The SOAR Security by Design app, again, is something of a legacy point for the project, which we developed, which focused on gamification, making kind of, it was a designed app in which places of worship management could go through. You can select mosques, temple, and synagogue, and it will go through security scenarios in which you have to select maybe the security gaps that are taking place. And it was kind of made it kind of fun and engagement to a certain extent. And this is actually now being redeveloped in another ISF-funded project called the Shielded project, which is currently taking place. So again, from a legacy perspective and impact perspective, this is now being redeveloped or built upon again, which is something we're also happy about. And the incident management guides that we've developed, one for the Muslim community, the Christian community, and the Jewish community. These have been disseminated, unfortunately, during some attacks that have happened over the past few years in Hamburg, in Vienna, and recently in France. There was obviously an incident, a stabbing at the mosque. In each one of those cases, the local communities and law enforcement have disseminated some of these guides to the local community, because it's about incident response, the certain steps to take once there is an incident to keep people safe and secure. And then finally, the UNAOC, who we did some work with, they produce yearly various guides on countering threats against vulnerable targets. They implemented the SOAR project as a best practice project to be looked at when it comes to protected security and safety. I had to rush the end a little bit there, but hopefully I'm not too ahead of time. But that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You did actually very well. Very disciplined panel this time. So yeah, it was really impressive how you guys especially went really deep into the various religious communities and you brought them together. And there I had a very quick question, also considering experiences that we or others have had. Did you encounter any difficulties in terms of religious communities not wanting to interact with each other, or having, certain degree of perhaps resentment, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, it's something that, again, is not, when you normally go to a community, again, at that time, it was just after COVID as well. So people still didn't really want to engage too much publicly. But the conversation was, when you go to a community, do you want to attend a training program? The first question is, who else is coming? And where is it taking place? And this is why we focused on neutral venues, because if you're doing an event for Muslims in a Hindu temple, for instance, they might not come, and vice versa across the faith. So the neutral venues, mainly hotels, worked really well. I mean, we managed to train 1,000 people there, so we managed to get to that level. There were some situations where some community groups wanted their own trainings. That took place once in a place called Radedesh, which is in Belgium. That was for the Hindu community, so they wanted something specific for them because they felt the threat kind of issues were a bit more unique. But most of the cases, we got Christians, Jewish, Muslims together at all times. And a good example of kind of bringing them together was we had a training in The Hague. And we had the Muslim community and the Hindu community, which were probably not too far apart from each other, but they'd never spoken to each other due to some other kind of political issues. And when we brought them together in the training, they set up actually after that their own security council. So in The Hague now, they have an interreligious security council where they all get together, I think, once every 2 to 3 months to review the situations, food, kind of networking. And that's like that's still taking place 2 years on. So there are challenges with that, but I think there are ways around it, and you can only do your best. But most of the time, bringing the different faiths together was a real success.
All right. Yeah, so this is the kinds of experience that we also had in our project. It was a difficult start, but then it was very fulfilling to see how the contacts and the networks kept on going after. All right. So with this, to make a full circle, we started with the PARTES, we end with PARTES. Before giving the floor to Joanna, I just wanted to give a shout out to all the partners of PARTES and really name them. Obviously, the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, where I'm affiliated, SOAR, also from Austria, where Stefan is affiliated in the back, and thanks already now for your help with organizing this event. We have the Innovative Prison System from Portugal, Fundea, Euro-Arab Foundation for Higher Studies, where José Luis is, ACT, Prison and Territory Association of Italy, Association Militant des Savoirs from France, and then we have EFSA's Foundation for South Asian Studies, where Joanna is from. We have Blue Line, so this is the organization that made all these very nice movies. We have the Association of the Bulgarian Jews from Vienna as well, KEMEA, Center for Security Studies in Greece, Violence Prevention Network from Germany, who is probably very well known in this crowd anyway, Diaconia, Latvian Evangelical Lutheran Church, and thank you so much for your doing even more than was required in the project. European Strategies Consulting from Romania, Hellenic Police from Greece, and the Murcia Police. Thank you so much for participating this time, and actually during the whole project it was really important to also have police authorities, especially such engaged ones like yourselves. So with this I give the word to Joanna, who was also a work package leader in the project, to present you the Guardian approach.
Thank you very much. First of all, for me, it was also a pleasure to work on the final outcomes of the PARTES project, which is namely the Guardian approach and the action sheets, which you can all find, first of all, on the chairs, but also on the back tables. So I would encourage you, when you have the time, to dive a bit deeper in them. So about the Guardian approach, I would be very brief. I'll just basically try to explain the methodology and structure of how we developed it, and we would also present a short video to visualize it. So what is the PARTES Guardian approach? It's a comprehensive framework for safeguarding places of worship across Europe, in this case particularly concerning the partner countries of this project. It provides a structured methodology that combines various protective dimensions to address both physical and digital threats, but we are also looking at different social factors. So we've included security, cybersecurity, community engagement, cooperation, mental health support, training, and financial sustainability. The development involved consultations with multiple stakeholders, ensuring that the approach is inclusive and well-informed. So why did we develop it? I believe that's already becoming clear from all the presentations we had today, based on all the security issues that are affecting places of worship across Europe. So how did we develop it? So basically, it's based on all the activities that we had to implement throughout the entire project. First, we analyzed in total 380 cases of successful violent attacks, 16 thwarted attacks, and 111 hate crimes, and 11 cyber attacks on places of worship. So these covered 13 European countries. Subsequently, to make the data even more to date, we were having interviews with religious representatives in each partner country. country. And in some countries, we also interviewed additionally law enforcement representatives to get more information. The reason for that was that in the beginning of the project, we also faced some level of, hesitation or even mistrust from certain religious communities, because when we approached them, they weren't sure, like, what's this really, about? Like, we were, trying to create a dialogue, and this is where we exactly noticed one of the main vulnerabilities was the lack of, certain trust deficits among certain communities, which oftentimes were justified simply because they have felt a certain level of targeting on a state level or certain level of vilification. So this is where we really noticed that we really need to work on establishing dialogue, establishing trust, to make sure that their concerns are being heard, and in that sense, we are addressing them adequately. So after these findings from the research and from the interviews, we organized 9 national workshops on establishing communications with different stakeholders. So this is where we were inviting religious leaders, but we were also inviting like national authorities or even civil society, depending on the needs of this particular country context. And after that, we had like a joint workshop in Brussels where participants from the different national workshops took part and were trying to exchange those insights that they were discussing during their national workshops. After that, we had 5 interreligious forums. Actually, we were meant to have 4, but because of the great interest, we had one additional one, which was great. So this is where we had more discussions of what is the role of religious communities, but also civil society organization in the prevention of violent extremism that could lead to attacks on places of worship. Following that, we had 2 living labs. One was concerning cybersecurity. So this one was providing more training for religious representatives on how to strengthen their cybersecurity or like digital presence, including like their social media presence. And the other one was on reactive security scenarios that was training law enforcement agencies on how to react in the case of, for instance, a possible attacks on a place of worship. So after all of these activities, we had another follow-up research phase because originally the research was intended to finish in November 2023, but as we all know, the war in the Middle East started in October 2023, so this is where we found like the imperative need to continue with the research to see how these events that are unfolding in the Middle East and unfortunately has also grave impact on, the diasporas and the communities in Europe, how is that influencing different social dynamics in our partner countries, and indeed we did see different dynamics when it came to social polarization and also hate speech, but also which translated in some cases, but also could translate in violence against places of worship. So based on all these activities, we created 18 different variables for identified gaps and shortcomings. So these were location-specific factors, structural vulnerabilities, operational security, technological factors, social and cultural factors, policy and legal environment. This is what we were like, for example, earlier mentioning in the case, for example, of France, that, even the legal frameworks could have their own vulnerabilities on the basis of how they are phrased, what is exactly the terminology, because definitions are also context-dependent, social-dependent, and politically dependent. Then we had incident response and recovery, socioeconomic factors, interfaith and community collaboration, event-related factors, religious and cultural sensitivities, internal governance and leadership. So this is more vulnerabilities based on the internal governments of, the place of worship itself. Social media and online presence, training and awareness programs, that applies to the different stakeholders involved, media coverage and public relations, law enforcement relations, meaning in relation to the place of worship itself and the religious communities, insurance and financial support, and political and cultural climate. I'm not going to go in depth of each of the different variables because it's very long. So I'll just give as an example 2 specific ones to see how we were trying to break them down, because the reason to break them down was on the basis of analyzing these categories to develop the policy recommendations for the approach itself. So here you could just see a snippet of Some of the factors relate to location, for instance, their geographic rural location, how urban versus rural setting has, certain impact on security, like proximity to high crime areas, or for instance, presence even in a conflict zone. So place of worship located on the outskirts of cities or in smaller rural areas could foster, for instance, segregation in, again, the specific context of, the countries that was analyzed, which could lead to isolation from the rest of society, which could trigger different stereotypes and therefore make the religious community more vulnerable to attacks, or in another cases, small rented premises turned into place of worship could be more difficult to secure with hard security measures. There might be also, for instance, reluctance or passivity on behalf of authorities in allowing the construction of religious spaces, which could place the religious community in danger itself. So here we see also the connection with like what is the legal frameworks in the country and the political climate. So a place of worship in a high crime urban area may face higher risks of theft, vandalism, and violent acts. This is what we were also talking earlier, that when we talk about the security of place of worship, we've seen different motivations. On one hand, it could be like, ideological, so related to, for instance, extremist groups, but we can also see opportunistic, so more related to, for example, financial crime. And this is where we looked at place of worship not only from the religious perspective, but we also look at them as cultural heritage. We look at them as also different buildings that also has like historical value and so on. So this is also when we think of protection that we need to also think about these different dimensions. So again, to be in time, I'll skip the rest. On operational security here again, some of the vulnerabilities that we looked is, for instance, with security protocols, so emergency response plans, regular drills, security training for staff and volunteers. So maybe there's absence of emergency response plans, which could lead to chaos. So this is more about like how, if, so this is where we talk not so much about prevention, but like reaction. In this particular case, if an attack happens, how would like, the staff or the representatives of the place of worship react to the incident? Community vigilance, so that's more about awareness and involvement of the congregation in security measures. So maybe a lack of awareness among congregants about security could result in delayed response to the threats. So this is where we've summarized some of the major, vulnerabilities. So here we've put lack of coordination. So efforts to protect place of worship are often fragmented, with limited collaboration between religious communities, law enforcement, and local authorities. This could lead to inconsistent and incomplete security measures. Limited awareness of threats. Many communities are unaware of the evolving nature of threats, especially online and cyber threats. Place of worship lack the training and infrastructure necessary to address these risks. At least the majority of them did, amongst the research of our project consortium. Inadequate reporting and data collection. There are significant gaps in reporting hate crimes and incidents against place of worship. Many countries lack comprehensive data collection systems, making it difficult to assess the full scope of the threats. Also, the underreporting had different dimensions. On one hand, certain communities normalized the hate speech and hate crime happening to them because of, the political climate of the country, believing that that's just normal and, the authorities are not going to do anything about it, which again leads to another vulnerability here. Again, mistrust in reporting something to the authorities because of mistrust that they would react upon this incident and taking it seriously. Another gap was insufficient physical and soft security, so many places of worship are inadequately secured against physical threats, lacking surveillance systems, access control and emergency protocols. Soft measures such as crisis response plans and volunteer trainings are often absent. Here we were also getting into another discussion that, securitization shouldn't also become over-securitization, and this was also something that we were in depth discussing with representatives of religious communities, that on one hand, while it's important to protect religious communities, it's also important not to make them feel so overly securitized that other people would be reluctant to enter, or might feel even that these security measures are put with a different hidden agenda by the authorities themselves. So it was about having like a very, nuanced and sensitive approach to what is the exactly appropriate physical security measures that should be placed at the particular spot so that people, the congregants and the worshippers don't feel themselves reluctant to join. Underfunded protection initiatives, that was actually something that was overarching across almost all of the places that we've interviewed, is that many places of worship, especially smaller religious communities, lack sufficient funding for critical security upgrades and protective measures. So this was more about like, also motivation on a local and national level of creating more funding opportunities. Lack of mental health support. So this was actually quite of a crucial aspect of our Guardian approach, was also about receiving mental health support to those that might have been affected. So religious groups that have experienced this type of violence often are lacking the adequate mental health support that could lead to long-term trauma and reduced resilience. Another issue was just in general lack of training when it comes to mental health incidents, because we've also seen that one of the fears was attacks not necessarily based on extremist ideology, but just having individuals who might be mentally disturbed and entering a place of worship, and the people present don't really have the adequate knowledge on how to respond to this critical situation, on how to contact the medical authorities to react to that. Inconsistent policy implementation. So although EU directives exist to combat hate crimes and support religious freedom, national level implementation, we saw it was inconsistent across the different countries. So that could lead some places of worship more vulnerable than others. So this is where we are having a nice video which presents our Guardian approach a bit more in detail.
The PARTES Guardian approach was developed as part of the PARTES project and aims to respond to rising threats faced by places of worship across Europe, such as physical attacks, cyber threats, and societal polarization. In Europe, places of worship are often perceived as soft targets, making it crucial to adopt a multifaceted approach that addresses both physical security and cultural sensitivity. The PARTES Guardian approach is aimed at key stakeholders, including law enforcement agencies, religious leaders, policymakers, and the broader faith communities. It provides a framework for collaborative protection efforts that respect the unique needs of these sacred spaces while ensuring robust security measures are in place. Research from the project identified significant gaps in existing protective measures for places of worship. As such, the PARTES Guardian approach goes beyond traditional security measures by integrating 7 key dimensions: physical security, cybersecurity, community engagement, cooperative planning, mental health support, financial strategies, and training dimension. These are key to ensure that these sacred places are protected from various forms of attacks. The physical security dimension involves the installation of physical barriers, such as reinforced doors, secure access points, surveillance systems, and increased law enforcement presence during high-risk events. Regular risk assessments are conducted to identify vulnerabilities and ensure that adaptable security measures are in place. Coordination with local governments and law enforcement agencies is crucial to maintain consistent protection, even in remote or smaller places of worship. The cybersecurity dimension is about protecting digital assets of places of worship through enhanced online security measures, including monitoring for cyber threats and addressing hate speech or online radicalization that can lead to physical violence. The community engagement dimension encourages active involvement from worshippers to create a vigilant and inclusive environment. This includes security training and interfaith initiatives to foster dialogue and reduce societal tensions. The cooperative dimension is about building strong partnerships between religious communities, and local organizations. This involves regular communication, joint planning for high-risk events, and coordination with private security where necessary. The mental health dimension offers mental health support for communities affected by incidents, helping them recover from trauma and strengthening resilience. The financial dimension ensures that places of worship have access to resources needed for sustained security. This could include government grants, EU funding, or community fundraising efforts dedicated to improving both physical and digital security measures. The training dimension ensures that all stakeholders, including law enforcement agencies, religious leaders, volunteers, and worshippers, are trained in security protocols. Tailored training programs can range from scenario-based drills for security personnel to safety workshops for the general congregation. Regular training and simulations help ensure that everyone involved is prepared to respond effectively during an emergency. A key element of the PARTES Guardian approach is the engagement of faith communities by listening to their concerns and priorities when it comes to safeguarding both their places of worship and their religious practices. This involvement ensures that any protective measures respect these spaces' cultural and spiritual significance. Through this new and integrated strategy, we are convinced that we can protect places of worship in a better way and ensure they remain safe and sacred havens for generations to come.
And just we had two last slides when where I wanted to also show the action sheets. So basically, you already saw them at the tables. The action sheets were more like best practices that we took from each country, which we tried to create as like a step-by-step model, which could be possibly replicated in other contexts, like, for example, how to create like an interfaith dialogue in another country, or step-by-step, guideline on how religious representatives of a place of worship should react in the case of having a mental health crisis within the congregation. So these are more just like step-by-step best practices that we identified in each country. And again, we have 23 action sheets collected from the 10 partners involved. And that's it. So I would be happy if you can go around and have a look. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and all of you for presenting these very impressive results of the EU-funded projects on this topic. I'm not sure if there's questions, urgent issues at this point. We are a little bit over time, but I think some of the networking already took place during the lunch break. Nevertheless, we still have a couple of minutes for wrap-up and networking. I think I'm just going to go towards that phase of our conference to try to be on time nevertheless. I think just to make sure I don't forget some very important people that had a very important role for preparing this conference. I would like to thank Olena, whom I think you all know or wrote emails to, organizing the transport and many other things. She's not here today because yesterday she was completely thrashed after our event, not because of alcohol, no, that's not the reason, but because she was a stage manager and had to coordinate artistic acts and deliveries and many other things. But this is my digital thank you to her, and also to Annika, who is also a very important member of our team, and she has been all throughout the PARTES project, so everybody knows her as well. Obviously, Stefan and also Eric from SOAR, I forgot to mention you before. Eric is becoming a little bit the methodological guru of the PARTES and PARTES.com. I also want to thank the technicians, Istvan, Walter, Rainer, Chris, and Richard. Thank you so much, guys. And also our securities, Nikolai and Sahel, who made sure that also we are protected. All right, I guess with the last minutes here on the stage, I'd just like to thank all of you for participating. I think it was a lot of information. I'm sure there will be even more need to talk about all the things that we have showed you here. And we have a little bit of time to do that over coffee. And I think there's some more baklava left. Otherwise, I will try to get some more. Please keep in touch with us and the follow-up projects and DG Home and their presence online or social media. And have a great day ahead and week, and see you soon. Thank you.